I never intended to go near the abandoned fun fair. In fact, I'd always thought those rumors about it were just local legends. Scary stories told to keep bored teenagers away from what was essentially a decaying death trap of rusting rides and collapsing tents. The old fairgrounds sat at the edge of town, far enough away from civilization to fade into obscurity, but close enough to catch the eye of the occasional thrill seeker or urban explorer. I guess I fell into that category. It all started when I found an old flyer while clearing out my garage. It was crumpled and yellowed, a relic from decades ago, advertising the grand opening of a fun fair named Midnight Carnival. It featured everything: roller coasters, Ferris wheels, fun houses, even a strange sideshow tent labeled "The Horrors of the Unknown." My curiosity piqued. I started asking around town about the place. Everyone, without fail, told me to stay away. They said strange things happened there, that anyone who ventured too far into its twisted attractions never came back the same. Some even disappeared altogether. Of course, that only made me more determined to see it for myself. That's how I found myself walking down the overgrown path toward the rusted gates one gray, overcast afternoon, the air heavy with a chill that seemed unnatural for the season. The gates groaned as I pushed them open, the sound echoing through the lifeless grounds like a warning I foolishly ignored. The fun fair looked worse than I'd imagined, like a scene from some post-apocalyptic movie. The once vibrant paint on the rides had long since peeled away, leaving nothing but a ghostly shell of what it used to be. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the occasional creak of a loose bolt or the flutter of decaying flags in the wind. I wandered deeper in, passing dilapidated food stands and broken-down ticket booths, feeling a strange pull to keep going, even though every instinct screamed at me to turn back. That's when I noticed the sign posted at the entrance of what seemed to be the heart of the fairgrounds. It was written in large, blocky letters, painted in a vibrant red that somehow still looked fresh despite the years of decay. "Welcome to the Midnight Carnival. Follow the rules or you'll never leave." Beneath it, scrawled in smaller, almost illegible handwriting, was a list of rules. At first, I laughed at how absurd it all seemed, but as I read each rule, an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. 1. Do not turn the power on or off. It attracts them. 2. If you hear music, cover your ears and run. They like to dance. 3. Stay off the roller coaster and Ferris wheel after dark. It doesn't stop until it's full. 4. If you enter the funhouse, never look directly at your reflection. It's not you. 5. The Ferris wheel will spin once a night. You don't want to be on it when it does. 6. If you see the clown, don't let him see you. He's always smiling, but he's never happy. Shaking my head, I crumpled the paper, stuffing it into my pocket. Urban legends, I told myself. Just stories. I was here for a quick exploration, maybe take some photos, and then head out before the sun set. But as I stepped further into the park, I felt like something was watching me. The sky had begun to darken, casting long shadows across the broken asphalt, and a cold wind had started to pick up. Still, I pressed on, moving toward the looming funhouse that sat in the center of the grounds. It looked larger than I expected. Its painted facade of grinning clowns and twisted carnival mirrors somehow still vibrant despite the decay. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the smell of mildew and dust hit me immediately. Inside, it was darker than it had any right to be. The maze of mirrors stretched out before me, warping and twisting my reflection in ways that made my skin crawl. I could hear my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the confined space. bouncing back at odd angles as if the funhouse were far larger inside than it appeared from the outside. After a few minutes of wandering, I realized I was lost. Every turn seemed to lead me back to the same reflection, a distorted version of myself with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. Panic began to set in, but I forced myself to stay calm. I remembered the rules: don't look at your reflection directly. I tried averting my gaze, but it was impossible to navigate without seeing the mirrors. That's when I noticed something off in one of the reflections. It wasn't me. Not exactly. It was taller, lankier, and as I looked closer, I saw it. A clown, grinning widely, standing in the reflection just behind me. My heart nearly stopped. I spun around, but the corridor was empty. Turning back to the mirror, I saw it again, closer this time. Its wide eyes locked onto mine as it moved soundlessly through the mirrored halls. My breath hitched as I began to run, navigating blindly through the maze, the reflection of the clown growing larger and larger with each turn. No matter how fast I ran, it seemed to gain on me. I rounded a corner and slammed into a dead end, the mirrors surrounding me on all sides, and there it was, standing just inches from my reflection, still grinning. I shut my eyes, remembering the rule, refusing to look at it any longer. I heard it move closer, felt the cold presence just behind me, but I kept my eyes closed, backing away until I stumbled into an exit I hadn't seen before. Gasping for breath, I burst out of the funhouse and into the night, the cold air hitting me like a slap. The sky had turned completely dark, and a low, eerie hum began to fill the air. That's when I realized the power had turned on by itself. Lights flickered to life all around the fun fair, casting long, unnatural shadows. I could hear the mechanical whir of the rides coming to life, rides that had been dead for decades. The Ferris wheel groaned as it began to spin, and in the distance, I heard the faint, haunting sound of carnival music. My blood ran cold as I remembered the second rule: cover your ears and run. I slapped my hands over my ears and bolted, sprinting across the fairgrounds as the music grew louder and louder. My heart pounded in my chest, and every step felt like a struggle against the invisible weight pressing down on me. The music was relentless, echoing in my mind despite my best efforts to block it out. In my panic, I ran straight into the control room of the park, a small building near the Ferris wheel. The door was unlocked, and I stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. The room was filled with old electrical equipment, most of it rusted and decayed, but the control panel for the power grid was lit up, buttons glowing faintly in the dim light. Without thinking, I flipped the switch, cutting off the power to the entire park. The music stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. But as I stood there, catching my breath, I realized I had broken the first rule: never turn the power on or off. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the fairgrounds, and I knew then that I had attracted them. I didn't know who or what they were, but I could feel their presence closing in. My only thought was to escape. I bolted out of the control room and ran toward the Ferris wheel, thinking maybe I could get high enough to see a way out. The wheel was still spinning slowly, its empty carriages creaking as they swayed in the wind. Without hesitation, I jumped into one of the carriages, hoping to use the height to spot an exit from the park. As the wheel carried me upward, I scanned the grounds below, but all I saw were shadows that moved unnaturally, creeping closer to the base of the Ferris wheel. Panic surged through me as I realized they were surrounding me. The ride stopped at the very top, leaving me suspended high above the ground with no way to escape. The wind howled around me, and I felt the entire structure shudder as something massive began to climb the wheel. I leaned over the edge of the carriage and saw one of them. A figure, tall and hunched, its face obscured by darkness, climbing up the metal framework with impossible speed. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out, but there was nowhere to go. The wheel began to spin again, faster this time, and I realized with a sickening jolt that the ride wasn't going to stop. It was obeying the third rule. The roller coaster and the Ferris wheel don't stop until they're full after dark. I was trapped. I was being hunted by something I couldn't see but could feel, creeping closer with every second. The wind whipped past, chilling me to the bone, and in the distance, I could hear faint laughter, high-pitched, unnerving, like the distorted sound of children's giggles mixed with something far more sinister. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening, but the only thought that kept echoing was that I had broken the rule, and I was paying the price. As the Ferris wheel carried me higher again, I spotted movement on the ground below, dark figures shifting in the shadows, their outlines just barely visible under the dim, flickering lights of the abandoned fair. I couldn't make them out clearly, but they seemed to be humanoid, moving with a jerky, unnatural speed, as if their limbs didn't quite bend the way they should. I knew I had to get out of the Ferris wheel before it carried me back down to them. The wheel wasn't going to stop until I was face to face with whatever had been stalking me since I'd entered the park. My heart pounded as I searched for an escape, and then I saw it. A maintenance ladder running down the side of the Ferris wheel, barely within reach. Without thinking, I swung myself out of the carriage, gripping the cold, rusty rungs of the ladder with trembling hands. The metal groaned under my weight, but I didn't have time to hesitate. I climbed down as fast as I could, the wind howling around me, the ground below seeming to get closer and closer with every step. As I descended, I glanced down and saw the figures gathering at the base of the Ferris wheel, staring up at me with hollow, vacant eyes. My heart raced faster as I reached the bottom, my feet hitting the ground hard. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I took off running, my legs aching, my lungs burning, but I had no choice. I had to get out. I needed to find the exit, but the park seemed to stretch out endlessly in every direction, the broken paths twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. The lights flickered again, casting eerie shadows across the fun fair, and I could hear the faint hum of electricity in the air, like a live wire sparking somewhere in the distance. That's when I spotted the roller coaster, its skeletal frame looming in the darkness like a twisted monument to something long dead. It was completely still, but I knew I couldn't risk breaking that rule too. Stay off the roller coaster after dark. It doesn't stop until it's full. I shuddered at the thought of what might happen if I got too close, and I veered away, heading for what looked like an old arcade building just beyond the midway. The door was hanging off its hinges, the inside dark and silent except for the soft sound of something moving in the shadows. I hesitated, but I didn't have a choice. The figures were still following me, their footsteps slow but relentless, and I had to hide. I slipped inside the arcade, my footsteps crunching over broken glass and debris, and crouched behind one of the old, rusted game machines. My breath came in ragged gasps, the darkness closing in around me, but at least for the moment, I was out of sight. The air was thick with dust, and I could smell the faint odor of something rotting nearby, but I tried to push it out of my mind. My heart was pounding so loudly in my ears that I almost didn't hear it. The faint, tinny sound of carnival music drifting through the building, so soft it was almost like a lullaby. I froze, remembering the second rule. If you hear music, cover your ears and run. They like to dance. Panic surged through me, and I clamped my hands over my ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was getting louder, echoing off the walls and bouncing through the empty arcade like the melody was alive, searching for me. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing as I bolted for the door, my hands still pressed tightly to the sides of my head. The music followed me, growing louder and more insistent, like it was burrowing into my skull, forcing its way into my mind. My vision blurred as I ran blindly through the park, my feet slipping on the uneven ground, and I barely managed to keep my balance. I had to find a way out, but the more I ran, the more the paths seemed to twist and change, leading me deeper into the park instead of toward the exit. My head was pounding from the music, and I knew I couldn't keep this up for much longer. That's when I saw it again, the Funhouse. It was looming in the distance like some kind of dark, twisted beacon. I knew the rule about the Funhouse too, but at that moment I didn't care. I needed shelter. I needed a place to hide from whatever was hunting me. I stumbled toward it, my legs aching, my lungs burning, and threw myself through the entrance, the door slamming shut behind me with a deafening bang. Inside, the air was thick and cold, the smell of mold and decay clinging to every surface. The maze of mirrors stretched out before me, their reflections distorted and grotesque, but I knew what to do this time. If you enter the Funhouse, never look directly at your reflection. It's not you. I kept my head down, my eyes fixed on the floor as I navigated the twisting corridors, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I could hear something moving in the mirrors again, the soft scrape of footsteps that weren't mine. My pulse quickened, but I kept moving, refusing to look up, even when I felt the presence drawing closer. I turned a corner, and the air grew colder, a deep, unsettling chill that crept under my skin and made my heart race. I knew I wasn't alone. Something was watching me, waiting for me to slip up, to make that one mistake that would let it catch me. But I kept going, my eyes on the ground, my footsteps quick and light. I reached the end of the corridor and pushed through a door that led me into a large, open room filled with more mirrors. But these were different, larger, more ornate, like something out of a twisted carnival nightmare. The reflections flickered and shifted as I moved, and in one of them, I saw it again, the clown. It was standing in the center of the room, grinning widely, its eyes locked onto mine in the mirror. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat as I remembered the final rule. If you see the clown, don't let him see you. He's always smiling, but he's never happy. But it was too late. I had already looked at him, and now he was staring directly at me through the mirror, his grin widening in a way that made my skin crawl. I turned to run, but the Funhouse was a maze, and the mirrors distorted everything, making it impossible to tell which way was out. I could hear the clown's footsteps behind me, soft but deliberate, like he knew exactly where I was going and wasn't in any hurry to catch me. Panic surged through me, and I ran faster, darting through the maze of mirrors, my reflection twisting and warping with every step. I didn't dare look directly at any of them, but I could feel the clown getting closer, his presence like a dark shadow following me through the maze. Finally, I saw the exit, a door at the far end of the room, barely visible through the distorted reflections. I bolted for it, my heart pounding in my chest, and burst through the door into the cold night air. The carnival was still alive, the ride spinning and the lights flickering, but the music had stopped. The Ferris wheel was still turning, but slower now, as if whatever had been chasing me was no longer in a rush. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I kept running, my legs shaking, my body on the verge of collapse. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here. I ran, my legs aching, lungs burning, heart pounding in my chest like it was ready to burst. The fun fair stretched on forever, and every path I took seemed to lead me deeper into the twisted nightmare. I could still feel the presence of the clown behind me, hear the faint sound of laughter, and I knew that if I slowed down for even a second, he would catch me. My vision was blurred with exhaustion, the lights of the rides flashing in and out of focus as I stumbled forward, desperate to find a way out. The Ferris wheel continued its slow, ominous spin in the distance, and the roller coaster stood silent, its cars motionless. But I dared not even glance at them, remembering the rules that had already come so close to killing me. The clown's footsteps echoed in my mind, relentless, never quite catching up, but always just close enough to keep me running, keep me terrified. My muscles screamed in protest, but I couldn't stop. I veered left, then right, the distorted paths and broken fences blurring together as my body moved on pure instinct. I couldn't tell how long I had been running, but I knew I had to be close to the entrance. I had to be. The smell of the decaying fairground filled my lungs, and I could feel my mind fraying at the edges, slipping between panic and exhaustion. But I kept pushing forward. That's when I saw it, a glimmer of hope, the rusted gates of the entrance in the distance, barely visible through the haze of flickering lights. My breath hitched in my throat, and for a moment, I thought I was hallucinating, that the park had finally broken me. But the gates were real, solid, and so close. I forced my legs to move faster, every step agony, but I couldn't stop now. The clown was right behind me, his laughter echoing in my ears, growing louder and more menacing with every passing second. My legs felt like they were filled with lead, my body threatening to collapse at any moment. But I reached the gates, fingers trembling as I grabbed the cold, rusted metal and pulled with all my strength. The gate didn't budge at first, stuck from years of disuse, and a wave of panic surged through me as I glanced over my shoulder, the clown's grinning face emerging from the shadows, his eyes glinting with malicious delight. I yanked harder, every muscle screaming in protest, and with a groan, the gate gave way, creaking open just enough for me to slip through. I stumbled out of the fun fair, collapsing onto the cracked pavement outside, gasping for air as I scrambled to my feet and slammed the gate shut behind me. I could see the clown through the bars, standing just inside the park, his grin impossibly wide, but he didn't follow. He couldn't leave. For a long, agonizing moment, we stood there, staring at each other, and then, without a sound, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the ground, my heart still racing, my mind barely able to process that I had made it out alive. The fun fair loomed behind me, silent now, the lights flickering one last time before plunging into darkness. I didn't care anymore. I was out. I was safe, barely. And as I lay there, staring up at the night sky, I knew I would never forget the horror of that place, or the rules that had almost cost me my life.